In the isolated hollows of eastern Kentucky during the late 19th century, stories circulated of a family so brutal, so vile, that their very name was spoken only in whispers. The Harland brothers, Samuel, Josiah, and Elias, were born and raised in the rugged wilderness of Devil's Creek, a place where the Appalachian Mountains twisted into steep ravines, where sunlight barely touched the damp forest floor, and where outsiders seldom returned once they ventured too deep. The Harlands lived in a rotting log cabin, hidden among thickets of hemlock and oak, their land marked not by fences or fields, but by silence and an air of menace. Neighbors claimed they could hear screams echoing through the night, though no one dared to investigate. In a land where lawmen rarely tread and blood feuds were settled with rifles, the Harlands thrived, not by farming or trading, but by preying upon those foolish enough to cross their path. The Harland brothers had grown up fatherless, raised by a mother whispered to be a witch, a woman who filled their heads with tales of hunger and survival, teaching them that flesh was flesh, whether animal or man. By the 1870s, the brothers had transformed their small homestead into something far darker. Traveling merchants, peddlers, and drifters passing through Devil's Creek often vanished without a trace, their horses found wandering riderless, their belongings sold quietly in nearby towns. Those who lived near the hollow knew better than to ask questions. Rumors spread of smoke rising from the Harlands' chimney at odd hours, of salted meats hanging in their smokehouse with no cattle ever seen on their property, and of the sickly sweet smell that lingered on the wind when the brothers were butchering. Some said the Harlands had turned to cannibalism out of desperation. Others believed they relished it, taking pleasure in consuming the flesh of those they murdered. Whatever the truth, by the winter of 1878, the Harlands had become Kentucky's most feared secret. The disappearances would have been written off as the dangers of frontier life were it not for a young merchant named Thomas Caldwell. In the spring of 1879, Caldwell rode through the Devil's Creek Pass with a wagon of goods, intending to sell his wares in the next county. He was never seen again. His horse was found days later at a river crossing, but his body was nowhere to be found. Caldwell's family, unlike so many others, refused to let the matter drop. His brother Samuel began asking questions in nearby towns, and soon his suspicions were whispered into the ears of lawmen. That whisper eventually reached the desk of Marshal William Patterson, a stern, relentless officer known for bringing order to the lawless corners of Appalachia. Patterson began keeping records of every disappearance tied to Devil's Creek, and by the end of his investigation's first year, he had linked over 24 vanished travelers to the Harland territory. It was no longer coincidence. It was a pattern, one painted in blood. Marshal Patterson, accompanied by Thomas Caldwell's surviving cousin, rode into the Devil's Creek Hollow in May of 1881, under the guise of being weary travelers in need of shelter. The Harland brothers welcomed them, but their hospitality was unsettling. The cabin's interior was crude, its walls blackened with soot, the air thick with the smell of decay masked poorly by herbs. Patterson's sharp eyes caught sight of stained butcher knives, heavy chains fixed to a post near the hearth, and a large smokehouse just beyond the cabin door. That night, as the Harlands feigned kindness, Patterson secretly noted the odd texture of the stew they served, meat that was stringy, pale, and raw. The cousin, sickened, whispered his fear to Patterson. They were eating human flesh. Patterson, outwardly calm, resolved to return with reinforcements, but the brothers had already marked their guests. As the night deepened, the Harlands began sharpening their knives, circling their visitors like wolves preparing to strike. The confrontation erupted violently in the dead of night. Patterson and his companion managed to fight their way out of the cabin, but not without injury. They fled into the woods, pursued by the Harland brothers, who knew every path, every hidden trail. For 2 nights, Patterson evaded capture, surviving on creek water and sheer grit, before reaching the nearest settlement to raise the alarm. His tale of cannibals lurking in Devil's Creek spread like wildfire, drawing both curiosity and terror. Within weeks, a posse of armed men, lawmen, settlers, and grieving families of the missing, gathered under Patterson's command. They marched into the hollow with rifles loaded and torches burning, determined to put an end to the Harland reign of terror. The brothers, however, were not caught off guard. The cabin had been fortified, traps laid in the woods, and the smokehouse locked tight like a vault of horrors. What the posse found when they finally breached the Harland property would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside the smokehouse hung dozens of human remains, bones stripped clean, torsos butchered like livestock, salted flesh stored in barrels as if for winter provisions. Tables were stained with blood, hooks dangled from the rafters, and personal belongings of victims were scattered like trophies in the corners. The posse uncovered pits filled with bones, skulls cracked open for marrow, and grisly evidence that suggested the Harlands had been consuming human flesh for nearly 2 decades. Hardened frontiersmen wept or vomited at the sight, and Marshal Patterson himself stood pale and silent, recording every detail to ensure justice could not be denied. The Harland brothers fought ferociously when cornered, refusing to surrender. Elias was shot dead during the raid, collapsing beside the very smokehouse where so many had met their end. Josiah and Samuel were captured alive after a bloody struggle, dragged in chains from their home of horror. Their trial, held in Lexington, drew enormous crowds, reporters, and curious onlookers who had heard whispers of cannibals in Kentucky but could not fathom the truth. The evidence presented was overwhelming: barrels of human flesh, countless bones, eyewitness testimony, and Patterson's meticulous records. The Harlands remained defiant, sneering at the proceedings, even joking about their so-called meat trade. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before declaring both men guilty of murder, cannibalism, and crimes against humanity. On a gray November morning in 1882, Samuel and Josiah Harland were hanged before a silent crowd. No words of remorse passed their lips. Only curses spat at the spectators who had come to see justice done. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves outside prison grounds, but their legend lived on. For years afterward, travelers avoided Devil's Creek, whispering of screams that still echoed through the hollow, of ghostly figures lingering near the rotted remains of the Harland cabin, and of a curse placed upon the land itself. To this day, locals say Devil's Creek is haunted, and that those who wander too close may hear the sound of butcher knives scraping against whetstones in the dead of night. The Harlands are gone, but their legacy remains etched in Kentucky's most sinister history, the tale of the Appalachian cannibals who feasted on fear and flesh alike. From the packed courthouse to the executioner's rope, the Harland brothers left behind a stain that Kentucky can never wash away. Their trial revealed horrors beyond belief, and their deaths marked the end of one of Appalachia's darkest chapters. But the echoes of their crimes live on, and it is up to us to remember them. Keep this history alive. Like this video, share it with those who seek the truth, and subscribe so you never miss another descent into the shadows of America's past.